What's going on, you guys? Lord Ad here. I'm here with Travis. We are doing kind of, just a back and forth conversation about the reviewing process in the industry. Particularly IGN because he does review for the IGN platform. And first off, I got a little bit of bulletin points. I didn't want to write too much because I didn't want the show feeling scripted. I don't want any of these to feel scripted. I want these to feel just a genuine conversation. So first off, Travis, go ahead and give the audience who doesn't know you, and I'm sure a lot of them know you, just a general idea of what you do and what led to this conversation.
Yeah, my name's Travis Northup. People online call me Tie Guy because I wear a suit. And yeah, I've been writing reviews about video games for over a decade, probably close to 15 years now. And yeah, that's what I do. I've been writing for IGN for maybe 4 or 5 years, and love it. Love critiquing games, love playing games and talking about them. And so any chance I get to talk to anybody about reviewing games and why I think it's super important and valuable to gamers, I take the opportunity to do so. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on because I think these conversations are vital, especially when it comes to media and influencers. I don't think the two of us have enough conversations to really, there should be more conversations in general, not just like us, like just in general. Because I feel like there's a lot of resentment and a lot of anger, like bitterness, any other
Hmm.
adjectives I can use between media. Because, sometimes the media people take shots at us. Most of the time, we take
Content
shots at.
creators?
I call them influencers because
Oh,
that's
influencers.
what the industry refers to us as is influencers.
Mm,
So
okay.
first off, I want your overall perspective because I know obviously you do the reviewing process on the IGN, but I'm sure you have the overall idea of how the whole reviewing process works. I just want
Mhm.
your idea of the reviewing process in the gaming industry in general right now, not just IGN, just from Metacritic to how they're handled towards the like code sent out. One of the things I want to really get your opinion on is like games like coming from the Bethesda studios. Pretty much giant games in general, Cyberpunk, Witcher. These are massive games that take sometimes hundreds of hours to do everything in the game.
Mhm.
You know, uh, I know they sent us the code for Starfield like 2 weeks before it came out. Do you think that's enough time to do something like that while you go over your opinion on the industry in general when it comes to reviews?
Okay, so first, I think you asked just an overview of the reviewing
Yes,
process, like ideally or how it works.
just how it works. Because the
How it
reason I
works.
brought
Okay.
up the Bethesda thing, because that is part of the process on how
Yeah, yeah.
long they give you to review these games.
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot and we talk about a lot internally. So, but yeah, the way reviews work and why they're important, which I think is another thing I like to explain, is that you know, r- media outlets exist to help consumers or gamers, right? If we're using the colloquialism, um, help them navigate the market and like understand what games are out there that maybe they should get excited about or what have you. And I know some people say online, well, I don't need IGN or anyone else to tell me. I'd like to play the game for myself. And that's great if you have unlimited time and unlimited money to do so, but you don't always. And so the idea is, well, what if you had a friend whose job it was to play all of the games and tell you what they think of them. And I think that's really what media outlets are for. They are your peers. We're just fellow gamers. We're not people making games in the industry or working for publishers or anything like that. We're just fellow gamers who gathered together and decided to start covering the industry and telling you what we think about it and reporting news and that sort of stuff. And so I think when media works, it's a really kind of a grassroots effort by regular gamers to just write about the industry and tell you what they think about it. And that's certainly the approach I take and that IGN takes. IGN's review style guide says that our North Star is that we're trying to um, recreate the friend on a couch conversation in our reviews. Right? You ask your friend, "Oh, you're playing that new game, Starfield. Well, what is that like?" And then, we try to avoid using crazy lingo or jargon or anything like that. We just want all of our reviews to sound like a guy just explaining to you on the couch exactly what he thinks of this game. And so that's what we try to channel.
And just
Um,
to interrupt you real quick, I
yeah,
think that's a lot of the content creation creators' way too. A lot of the reviews I see,
yeah,
it definitely seems like they're recreating that. And when it comes to something like that, I think that's the best approach. But
yeah.
what's funny is we'll get into it in a second is like the donkey video, where it does seem like a lot of reviews when you put them out. Especially with media outlets, and I would say a lot of content creators do it too. It seems like everyone goes with the same script, and that's why I try to make it a little bit on like you know just this is what I feel. I try to get quick in and out for the most part, and I don't really give like any kind of numbers on anything because I feel like a lot of people weaponize the numbers at the end, and it's just like I go to the
It
point where
happens.
it's like, is it worth your money? That's how I do it.
For sure. Yeah, I have trouble with the money conversation because money means different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have unlimited amounts and it doesn't mean anything, and so it's really hard to say, is it worth your money? Or time for that matter. Some people have lots of time and some people don't. And so I try to keep that stuff out of reviews, and that's actually part of IGN's style guide is to not talk about money or how much a game costs because some games are amazing, like Apex Legends, which is free, and some games cost a lot of money like Nerf Legends, which is a full $50-$60 game, and are really bad. And so I don't know if money helps the conversation, but anyway, we're already getting into the depths of this. So the kind of the purpose of a review is, the reason we review the game is because we want to speak to our audience and create something that's useful to them, which in this case is a recommendation or not a recommendation for a game. And the reason publishers provide codes to outlets like IGN or influencers, YouTube folks, Twitch streamers, is because our interests are sort of aligned in that we want to cover your game because we think our readers care about it, and you want your game covered because it's publicity, right? And so you're willing to give a copy of your game because you think it's good, or you think if it's not good that it's still worth the coverage you get by providing a code to whoever you're providing it to. We take those codes early, we play the game as much as we can, and then we write our thoughts about what we think of it. At IGN, that also involves assigning a score, which I think is important because it is super useful to readers who want to know how much something is being recommended or how much it isn't being recommended. And they can kind of decide for themselves if they agree with that review or if to me the most important part of the review is explaining the reasoning behind how you came to the conclusion you have, because even if you disagree with the score, you can see, oh well, this person rated it a 9 out of 10, but the things that they highlighted that they didn't like, they trouble me a lot more, and therefore I probably would like that game less than this person liked it, and so I think that stuff is useful. Um, that's how the review industry works. I think it's super valuable to consumers. We get that all the time. If I give a game a bad review score, the first thing I see in the comments is people saying, "Oh, thank God I had this on my list, or I pre-ordered this. I'm going to cancel it." And when sometimes we recommend games that nobody has heard of, and then they go out and buy it, like I did a couple months ago when I recommended Dave the Diver to the world. And that's a game that might not have been on a lot of people's list, but then they go out and they play it. And I think that's super cool too. Um, your other question about how much time we get, it sort of depends. Obviously, more time is always better. I will never say no to more time. But I understand that these games are being made um, really down to the wire these days. A lot of them are not finished until the day one patch, or sometimes even after the day one patch. Um, and so obviously I prefer more time, but I do think the amount of time that we got for Starfield, which I think was, it might have been a little bit more than time than you got it. I think we maybe had 3 weeks. It felt like I was playing it for about 3 weeks before that game came out. And I think it was certainly enough time to draw a conclusion on the game, because I think after 60 to 100 hours, you sort of settle on how you feel about Starfield, regardless of if you haven't seen every side quest or whatever. You kind of get it, right? You don't have to play 300 hours of something to tell your friend whether or not they should play it. Some of us did, but I don't think it's necessary. So
I hear you. I think 2 weeks is pretty substantial amount of time.
I've had a
Especially.
lot less.
Oh yeah,
Payday
I've
3 is, here's a something you want to talk about, a the way it shouldn't work. Tomorrow Payday 3 comes out.
And the
but it's
servers aren't
entering
live.
early
Early
access,
access.
which is not real. It's not really early access. It's just they're selling you the money, the game, and making you pay more if you want to play it on time. Um, and they sent out invites for people for outlets to get copies of the game, and the embargo was for the day that they release it into regular access, and you're not allowed to publish reviews about it before that date. And so IGN politely said, no, we are not agreeing to this embargo because the game is out already by the time you want us to publish a review. And so, we're just buying the game ourselves and we're just going to play it tomorrow when it comes out into early access, quote. And we're going to write our review whenever we damn well please because
Dude,
those embargoes are manipulative and I think not true. So,
that's where I wanted to go. Actually, was my next question. First thing I wanted to tackle was like the industry in general, then go into IGN in particular. I
mhm.
do think that sometimes publishers, PR, they use the reviewing process to really put the curve
Like a
more on their
cudgel.
end. Yeah, to put the curve
Yeah, they
more on
use it
their
like a
end.
cudgel. Yeah, absolutely.
If you, if someone came up to you and said, Travis, how would you change it? How do you think these things should be done? Because I think that there are certain scenarios where the embargo list the day it comes out where most of the time it looks fishy, and then there's certain times where certain developers are like just do it just to do it, and it's just like I feel like there's room for improvement in there where
Yeah.
things could definitely be better, more transparent. Because I'm keen on transparency.
Yeah.
You tell me everything up front, and I think it will work out better for you in the end.
Yeah, so it's certainly true that publishers try to make their games look good, and I mean that's their job, right? They're an extension of the marketing team. Sometimes they are the marketing team, and they're trying to get good PR. Um, but I think there's no way to prevent that. You ask me what I could change. I mean, obviously, if I could change it, I would make it so that the PR agencies genuinely want the truth to the actual truth to enter the public forum
So
and for them to understand it. But I don't think that's ever going to happen.
okay,
And
so
so,
let me
it,
ask you this then:
yeah,
if more people did what IGN did, and when they got an embargo that's like very,
it's fishy. Yeah.
fishy, they just refused it. Do you think that would change things, or do you think PR be like, you probably weren't going to roll in my favor anyway and just keep it moving?
I think that they would do that if more outlets did it because they know IGN's going to cover it anyway. They're just going to cover it after the game's out. And I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to not ward off the people who are going to buy it on the first day. And so they will view the IGN, any traffic that they would get as like maybe convincing additional people to buy it. Or if it's a negative review, which we don't know yet because we haven't reviewed the game yet, um, it'll be a hit to them, but it will be after their most loyal fans have already bought the game in early access. And so early access, I hate that term, by the way. I keep using it because
Yeah,
it's their term, but it's not real. That's not what it actually
it's
is.
just like you get it a couple
Yeah.
days after it went gold. Like
Yeah. It's basically like what they should do is they should call the standard version late access, and then they should call the quote early access version just the regular release because that's what it is. But yeah, I think PR companies are always going to work in the interest of their clients. And if it's done internally, they're going to do it in the interest of their game and they're going to want it to appear to be a good game when it hits Metacritic or when people review it. And I think that that's okay for them to do it. What's important, I think, is to have the other balance of power, right? Which is the people who are reviewing it are allowed to give their honest opinions and are unafraid to do so. And I think that those two levers they help, right? It's like having a prosecutor and a defense attorney, right? It's like you kind of need that push and pull to make things work. And so I don't expect PR companies to ever change or publishers to ever change how they give out codes, and they're always going to try to turn it in their favor. If I could change one thing about the process, I would actually change consumer behavior to not buy the game before they think that it has reached the public forum, an opinion has reached the public forum, and that they can make an informed decision. Because I feel like a lot of people allow themselves to get caught up in the hype of marketing and they buy the game before they've actually heard any of their peers say what their opinions are. Or they do this weird thing where they don't trust their peers, right? Like they'll get an opinion from IGN and GameSpot and a bunch of other places that say like, yeah, this game is good, or yeah, this game is bad. And they'll go, well, I don't agree. I don't believe you. I think that you are doing it because you're biased, or you're doing it because they paid you, or some other reason, which just isn't true. And I think if anybody had any interaction with these organizations, they'd know that that's not our angle or how our organizations make money at all. And we are actually just trying. I mean, our interests are aligned. Like if we
Hmm.
create good content, good reviews, more people are going to read them, and if we have more readers, then that's more money because more visitors on our site. Like our interests are aligned. There's never any reason we would act against the reader's interest because it's our own interest. And so I have trouble with that. But if I could change anything, I would just change that, because I think that's the only thing you really can change, is to get people to not buy into early access. Definitely not, especially if they're not allowing reviews to happen before early access takes
I,
place, and maybe to wait a couple days to buy the game instead of going ham on it right away,
I think
if no reviews have been given. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I would change is like I feel like there's too much going on when it comes to like influencers, media. Like there's too many layers. Like I don't know how I cannot tell you how long IOP fought to like get more access, and then when you get the access, you realize there's tiers of access. Not
Yep.
everyone's alike. And to me, if you're gonna give a code, and people say, "Oh, addict, you're being entitled." If it's like no, it's like if I know I'm getting a code and I've been told I'm going to get a code, why I gotta wait 3 weeks? Why don't they all just go out at the
Yeah.
same time to media, to influencers, to you smaller websites, so everyone can
I can answer that
visibly,
question.
yeah, answer that
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, I can tell you why that works that way. So the reason codes has started to go out in tiers, which is kind of a new thing, because it's only kind of recently that streamers and influencers and YouTube guys have started to get these codes and be considered like kind of rough equivalent of outlets. Like people look at ACG or Skill Up and go, oh yeah, these are where I go to for my reviews. Is it's the marketing team trying to pad out when their news hits, right? Because if all the news about your game happens on the same day, then that's one big we're trending moment, and then it dies down. But if you spread it out across different segments where you have proper traditional media companies, and then a couple of your most favorite influencers, and then less important tertiary influencers or smaller outlets, then you get to spread out your trending throughout 3 different weeks where they hit on different weeks and all that stuff. And so it literally is just them working marketing. The other thing that people don't realize is that the vast majority of the time, the publisher has to pay for the free copies they're giving to outlets, every single copy. And that's because there's rules on these platforms. So if it's like an Xbox copy or a PlayStation copy, the 30% that normally needs to get paid out to that
They have to pay
platform
that up
distributor,
front.
they pay that 30%. So they obviously don't pay the 70% they would go to themselves, but they pay that 30%. And when you start to do the math about how many codes they actually give out, which number in the thousands, it's actually a huge expense. Like I was talking to a publisher who she'll go unnamed, but he was talking about an upcoming game he released this year, and he said that they were already estimating it was going to cost them like $100,000+ just to get the review copies out the door, which is like a lot of money. And so it's not like they have unlimited funds to do this.
Yeah, they
The
don't.
exception to that is if the person releasing the game owns the platform, right? So Microsoft Starfield, they could give unlimited because they don't have to pay either fee, right? And so they don't really have a reason to not give them. At least that's my understanding. There might be tax laws. I know that some countries, like I bet Europe, you have to pay some sort of tax if you give a European outlet, which is why a lot of that continent got skipped. Would be my guess. But I don't actually know the logistics in there. I just know that there is a cost associated with it the vast majority of the time, and that can be burdensome, and it makes people think that they're up to something fishy. For me, I don't really care how a publisher does it as long as they are earnestly trying to get the word out to as many people as possible. I have a problem if they're trying to choose outlets that they think will side with them, or think that
We're about to
will
get
have
into
some
that
sort
here
of
in a second.
biased opinion, which I have a problem with. And then the final thing is embargo times. I feel like you
That's
have to give the embargo time before the game is available in any form to the public before you start
Sometimes they
charging money
change
to
them.
it.
They change the
Yeah.
embargo, and like that's
Sometimes,
another.
yeah, Liza P just changed it, although they changed theirs a day earlier, which I would say is a good thing. But maybe they only did that because they thought the reviews were going to be positive, right? And they were feeling confident about it.
And that's another thing I've seen. Like I saw it with Dying Light too. Like different embargoes for different media. Like okay, getting
Yep.
codes, that's one thing, but when you're giving embargoes, okay, this is an embargo for certain websites.
Hmm.
This is an embargo for certain influencers. I'm just like, at that point, no wonder there's embargo breaking all the time because
Yeah.
there's so much confusion on who goes when.
Yeah. So a lot of those deals, like if it's individual basis, it's like, oh, you're one of our most valuable influencers, so we're gonna like give you an exclusive. Like you can do it 24 hours early, and they'll do something like that. And I tend to agree with you that I think that it just causes more confusion. And I'm not a fan of publishers picking their reviewers because you can pick who you give early copies to. That's fine. I think it's a little shady if you're trying to be super selective to twist a positive result for your company, but I expect you to do that. But, there should never be a case where, there's a chosen few that are selected to give the review, and then everyone else has to give the review 2 weeks after the game's out when everybody's already kind of made their purchasing decisions, because that sort of defeats the purpose of a review. And before early copies were a thing, which there was a time where early copies were really hard to get, you either had to go on site at the studio and play the game, or you had to get a physical copy shipped to your house and play it early and all that stuff. Before that, I feel like people only really bought games if there was something they were super confident they were going to like, and then they had a tendency to wait until a verdict was reached in the gaming community before they spent their dollars. And I feel like increasingly that happens less these days. Like it seems like people either buy the game right at the get-go or they buy it later, and that might just be instant gratification, digital downloads, all that stuff that allows people to just grab it immediately once they see an ad. But I just we're doing our best. I think everybody's trying to do their best, whether you're an influencer or a traditional outlet. Everybody's just trying to like get information to their readers as soon as possible. And I think 99% of them are trying to do that in a really honest way, and not do anything scummy. But there are obviously cases
Yeah.
where people write and say things that they shouldn't write or that they don't actually believe.
All right.
That's
So,
unfortunate.
so I only got two more questions before we get to more
Okay.
IGN centric questions.
All right. All right.
What is your opinion on if someone truly has to beat a game to review a game? Do you think that it's one of those things that they could put absurd amount of hours but not finish? Do you think there needs to be those credits before they start doing a review?
Yeah, for me, a review really should, I wouldn't watch the first VHS of Titanic and then write my review of Titanic. Oh, it was a happy little romance story. Nothing bad happened, right? Before I watch the second half. I do think that you do need to finish games, and IGN has a rule for its reviewers that you have to finish the game to write your review, and I think it's a good rule.
Yeah.
That said, I think there are some games that are less about the finishing, and I think there's also room for, like, imagine somebody creating a YouTube channel that was just called First 5 Hours Review, right? Where they just, for people who are short on time, who don't have a lot of gaming time, like people with kids, hey, here's the first 5 hours of the game and whether I think you'll enjoy it, because that's probably all you're going to play. I could totally see somebody creating a YouTube channel like that, and it would probably be popular because I bet you a lot of people don't make it past the first 5 hours of games. And so I could see something like that, but I think a traditional review, if you want to be creditable, I think you have to. I think you have to play the full game, and that's certainly our policy at IGN.
Yeah, for the mass majority of games, I would say you definitely have to see the credits. The only time
Yeah,
I would say that you don't have to see the credits you can review is if you dropped a game and you're explaining why. Because I think that's still a review. Look,
sure.
I
Or if you
didn't
can't
like
finish
this
it,
game, and this is the review
yeah.
on why I didn't like it.
Yeah, or if you couldn't finish it because you reached a game-breaking bug,
Mm-hmm.
that happens sometimes. Or if it's an online multiplayer game that doesn't really have an ending, I would just say put like 20 hours in, as much as you can, into the multiplayer modes, or however long you feel you need to play to feel like you've experienced everything there is to experience. Like I'm reviewing Payday 3, which I imagine I'm going to
I
start
have it
playing it
too.
tomorrow
I
morning.
have it too.
I'm nice. I imagine um, it's not going to have an ending, right?
Yeah,
Really?
it's
Because those
not.
games kind of don't. And so it's play every heist a couple times and then start to form your thoughts, probably. So,
So one thing I do want to like brush up a little bit on, like when it comes to exactly how codes are distributed. Now we know that there's a lot of speculation going on with Starfield on they cherry picked who they sent it to.
They
First
definitely
off,
did.
uh,
Yeah.
what would you consider cherry picking? Because I'm kind of curious on that. Because I don't think they cherry picked. I think they sent it out, but they did avoid people for a fact that they knew it was either being like negative on this stuff. Do you think that when it comes to stuff like that, because like I see people like Abontis getting it, I don't consider that cherry picking. Because to me, if they were
Sure.
truly going to cherry pick, it would strictly be one way, one angle. I feel like
Sure.
they gave a lot of middle ground. Now, at the end of the day, do you think a company should stand on morals when it comes to people making statements on Twitter that they didn't receive codes because of it? Because I think there's a lot of that going on too. It's like you've made some outlandish statements on maybe political stuff or gaming stuff,
Yeah.
and we're not going to give you a code because of that. Do you think you know? Do you think stuff like that goes on? Obviously, it does, but I want your opinion
Yeah.
on that because obviously Doctor Disrespect didn't get one. There's been a
Yeah.
variety of
I mean,
people.
I get that. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
there's been
Like,
a variety of people that didn't get codes. I remember Digital Foundry and
Digital
Eurogamer.
Foundry was a big one. I
Yeah,
think a lot of European outlets didn't get codes, and I'm not really 100% sure on that if there was like a cost associated like the tax thing or if they simply just thought for whatever reason that they didn't want to prioritize it for some reason. I'm not really sure, but
which is interesting, to say
it
the
is
least.
interesting. Yeah. I can tell you this. I know that Starfield was cherry picked because I know the company that gave out codes for that, and my fiance was a former employee there, and she used to
Ooh,
decide who gets codes. That was her job. And so the way that that company works, which I won't name the company, but
yeah, I
you
know the
know,
company. I won't name them
yeah, you know
either.
the company. They have a tier list for outlets and for influencers, and so they have like A tier, B tier, C tier, yada yada, and then they have a even larger list of untiered outlets, people or organizations that they don't really know if they have a lot of clout or they presume that they don't have a lot of clout. And typically, what they'll do is they'll give codes in order and then see how far they can get down their tiered list until
Before
they
they
run out
run
of
out of
codes.
codes.
Yeah, depending on how many they have. Sometimes they'll take another approach where they'll try to get like an even split between all the tiers. That's pretty
Hmm.
uncommon. Usually they're just trying to get as much press as possible, right?
So,
So
do
if
you
you
think
really
they
believe in
go
your
for
game, give it A,
more?
B, and C.
Do you think they go for more
Yeah.
mainstream or more for what favors them as a better Metacritic score? Because I'm gonna talk about Metacritic
Depends.
here later, but
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
me, it feels like if they were trying to push that narrative their way, they would go
Hmm.
for okay, we want people that's gonna favorite us entirely. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of influencers in some media sites that just didn't like the game and they got review codes. So that's why like I'm kind of pushing back a little bit on like
Yeah. Yeah.
truly, because truly cherry pickings mean you're gonna pick all the good ones, all the healthy cherries. You don't want no black spots. But I didn't really see that, and I'm not saying they didn't cherry pick to some
Yeah.
degree, but I don't
I
think it
think,
as much as people act like on
yeah.
Twitter that they only gave it to people that they knew would like the game.
I don't think that's true. I think that they put their thumb on the scale as much as they could without being egregious. And so I think in their defense, they didn't try to like intentionally screw themselves over, right? Like they weren't handing out a bunch of codes to outlets that have like PlayStation in the title of their name, right? Like they didn't do that. Uh, should they have? Probably not. I would say like I don't really value those outlets that are like very PlayStation or very Xbox focused, but you can see very clearly in the outlets that the ones that they did give, they kind of greenlit everyone who was an Xbox outlet, right? And then all the ones that maybe they were less sure of, they deprioritized or didn't give a code at all. But I don't think that they blacklisted big outlets because they thought that they were afraid of their review score. Like they gave IGN a code, they don't know what IGN's going to review it. They didn't even know who was reviewing it on our team, et cetera. And that's kind of usual. There's like a little bit of black box, but I think they made smart guesses. They were like, all right, here's all the people we have to give a code to. You have to give a code to IGN. They're too big an outlet. If we don't have a review there, it's
So
going to like damage our PR, like how many people hear about our game and read reviews. But here's all the ones that are probably untiered. My guess is a whole bunch of untiered providers got codes with priority for specific reasons.
Do you think
and the reason was because they thought they would be a positive review.
Do you think they have mad people researching these
I know
people
they do.
and
My fiance
seeing
was a researcher
and just seeing like what way
yeah.
they would tear left or right?
I don't think it's specific people. There are exceptions to that rule where they'll actually have like they'll put together like dossiers on specific people. Like my fiance, she was publishing a game and she put together a dossier on Paul Tassi because she knew Paul Tassi was gonna be interested in the game, and so it was like, here's all the stuff he's created, the news coverage, here's the things he cares about, and like gave that to her manager or whatever. And but usually it's for outlets, right? They'll have like a description of the outlets. Here's how big their reach is. Here's the type of topics they cover. Here's what they've given previous games from this publisher in this genre. They do research on that stuff, and so I know that exists. And my guess is they were like yes to everything on A tier, maybe yes to everything on B tier except for Europe for some reason. And then we're going to go through C tier, D tier, and untiered, and we're going to say yes to all the ones that we think are going to be positive. And that's that. I expect them to do that, to be clear. I expect them to do that because PR is always going to act in their interest, and that's fine as long as the other side of the equation exists as well, which is that people reviewing the game are acting in the interest of average gamers and consumers and are not afraid to give honest feedback. And that sometimes happens at small outlets where they're afraid to give honest feedback because they're afraid if they give a negative review to a Nintendo game, Nintendo's going to blacklist them and never give them a code again. And so there's a little bit of that's why I'm lucky to work at a large outlet because I used to work at a small outlet. And there was a little bit of pressure there.
Can happen.
But here it's like they can't not give me a code. So and even if they didn't give me a code, I could just write the review late and then millions of people
because your reach is big enough for you.
Because my reach is big enough. I don't have to play that game. But I do think that there was definitely a game played on Starfield specifically on the PR side to try to make it in their favor. And you can see it in the Metacritic in the weeks following, right? Like the Metacritic has slid down over time. And I think that was probably expected based on who they gave the review codes to. I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world, right? Like I said, I expect PR people to do it, but it's definitely not good, right? Like it's not super honest for them to do it, but they did what they could to put the cards in their favor.
There's like a lot of guidelines for stuff like this, but I do think this is one of the guidelines that was overlooked in terms of like form of government and stuff. Do you think there needs to be a third party looking at stuff like this? Like, because it's just like, because you would make an argument that some of this is false advertising. Like we are strategically putting places where I need them. And, don't get it twisted. The whole industry does this. I know for a fact. I've been told multiple times. Not just our industry,
by the way. Every industry does this.
Yeah, I know for a fact that Sony's done this. Xbox, obviously, everyone has done this to some degree. It's just some people are extra about it, and some people, they dabble, they sprinkle a little into.
Some people are a little bit more open, and they try to just genuinely.
Ubisoft's really good. I can honestly say. I've never had an issue where Ubisoft, like any way, shape, or form, has tried to like shut me out of anything. Like for the most part, they're like, okay, like just.
There's also ebbs and flows depending on who's in charge or which PR company they're using. Because to be clear, Xbox and Microsoft did nothing on the review code thing. That was 100% not the publisher, the PR company that they hired to do it. They did it on their behalf, and so they're saying, "Hey, we trust your expertise. Do what you do best." And that company's going, "Oh yeah. We're going to do what we do best. We're going to try to, get this thing as close to what you think it's going to review at internally as possible." And I think they did a good job doing that. I don't know if there should be a third party. And here's why. If you're trying to put yourself in the publisher's shoes or the PR company's shoes, you're saying, I know this game is going to get review bombed by PlayStation people, and that's unfair. Therefore, I should do everything in my power to stack the cards in my favor. All I'm doing is fighting against a process that could destroy a game that I think is good and actually deserves like a fair shot. Right? And that's not a crazy argument. You could definitely see that. Like you see review bombing online. I'm sure there are outlets that wrote disingenuous reviews. Actually, we already read one, right? The Jimquisition review was it cited specific qualities about Bethesda as a studio that person didn't like that had nothing to do with the game. Right? Like that's just not that's not a review. That's you reviewing the studio maybe, but not reviewing the game. I think Hogwarts Legacy had a similar thing where people were reviewing
more situations. About political
they were
reviewing
than the actual game. They weren't reviewing the game. And so if you're a publisher and you know your game is going to be controversial or there's going to be people out to get you, I totally understand why you would try to stack the chips in your favor. I get that. I still think ultimately it's a little dishonest, but does there need to be like a regulatory body? I don't know, because then
I
you
don't
would
think
need a
we're that
regulatory
bad yet.
body.
I
I
don't
don't
think
think we're
we're
that
that
bad.
bad yet.
I don't think it's gotten to the point where it's false advertising. I tend to believe the vast majority of people who wrote Starfield reviews and gave high scores genuinely believe the things that they wrote. I think the vast majority of people do. And so if it's just people giving their honest opinions, you will never hear any outcry from me, you know? I would just say it takes all types. Look at your favorite YouTubers, certainly. Look at the small indie outlets that you trust. But also, I would say, look at the large outlets, even if you don't like them, because you have to keep in mind these are the outlets that got codes, whether the publisher wanted it or not. And
Hmm.
so I would put that a little bit into your algorithm of like, how much do I trust these reviews? Because people say, oh, I only trust, YouTubers. I would say do the opposite. Like, YouTubers are fine. I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying if I had to pick one, I would pick the one that is big, has a separate editorial team from their sales team, right? YouTubers don't have that. They're the advertisers and they're the editorial, right? And so there's a conflict of interest there, certainly. And they're the type of people that a publisher could say no to. They can't say
Hmm.
no to GameSpot, right? So that's my 2 cents, and I tend to trust traditional media, but I'm a little old school that way. I'm also biased. I
Yeah,
work
yeah.
for
Well,
traditional
I'm
media outlet.
clearly you're
Yeah,
biased towards traditional, and I'm biased towards content creation influencer. It's
yeah,
what we're in. Like I'm an
yeah. That's what we're in.
influencer interviewing a traditional media outlet reviewer. All right, so let's
Yeah.
let's let's go over IGN. What's
All right.
I want the process that you can give. I don't obviously I don't know
Mhm.
if there's any
I
restrictions
can
that you
tell you
could talk
anything.
about. So
I
the
can tell you
process
anything.
from
Yeah.
uh you know who decides who gets what review. I want the beginning to end on who decides it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm curious, and you could put this at the end, is I saw Sea of Stars review. I watched your guys' review on that, and I
Nice.
noticed there was a lot of spoilers in that particular
Mm.
review. I'm kind of curious how that goes. Like, does the person editing it not know what he's editing, or is he just don't? Obviously, he cares because he works for
Yeah.
IGN. It's just kind of weird how those slip through the cracks. So go ahead and give
Yeah.
your take on that stuff.
All right, I'll give the last one first, which is spoilers. So the way a review works is after we've done the written version, somebody will turn that written version into a script, which is usually shorter. They will upload all of the footage that they recorded that they want to use in the review, and then they will annotate the script, which means like specifically highlight lines and match them to video clips that you want there, and then you pass it off to a
Make the
video
producer
editor
easier.
to push it together and add your VO and all that stuff. And so it's sort of a handoff to the video editor. We do talk about spoilers where we're like, hey, do we think that this is a line we don't want to cross, where we don't want to show this or we don't want to talk about it? But it's always kind of a back and forth, right? Because let's talk about like temples in Starfield. Technically, talking about temples in
Is a
Starfield is a
spoiler.
spoiler. But if you don't talk about that, it's a big part of the game. It's a part of the game that I find super annoying. And so if no reviews are talking
I didn't
about
like those
that,
at all.
yeah, they're really like monotonous, right? And so I think if you don't talk about that, like, are you doing a disservice to the reader? And so to us, it's a balancing act. Like we try to measure like how much is it worth showing this? How important is this to get the message across for why we felt this way about the game to the reader versus how much are we taking away if they do this? And so we try to avoid spoilers at every opportunity. We are not perfect. Some stuff slips through and we show things that we probably shouldn't. I actually don't know the Sea of Stars situation or how much of that is spoilers, but
Oh,
my
it
general
was
rule
showing
is
like in-game people in that thing.
my rule is if it happens in the first like 10% of the game, 15% of the game, I don't really think it's a
Yeah, I
spoiler.
don't either. I feel
I don't
like
think so.
because
Yeah.
usually I record the first like 5 hours. That's
Yeah.
gameplay, story content. If I have that first 5 hours in terms of all that, that's not a spoiler. And I
Yeah.
try to stay away from more story things. Story thing I might do the first hour,
Yeah.
but man, I ain't gonna lie to you, Travis. They were showing like
All
the
right.
last boss of Sea of Stars. Like
Okay, but here's the thing. If you don't know it's the last boss, is it a spoiler?
I feel you on that, but at the same
Because I did that once where I was showing a combat sequence and it was a Digimon game where it was literally just one Digimon fighting another Digimon and all the comments were dude, you showed the final boss fight. That's a spoiler. And all the comments under that were
they
like,
only
why?
knew that because they beat the game.
Exactly. And all the comments under that were, dude, why did you write this comment? Now I know that's a spoiler. Like if you would have said nothing, it wouldn't have been spoiled for me. So I think there is a
You
little
think
give and
there's a
take.
little
Like
bit of gray area right there?
yeah, there's a little bit of gray. I would just say like IGN tries to do its best. I assume everybody tries to do its best,
It's
but you have
hard.
to show
It's
you have
really
to show
hard.
some stuff of the game. It
And
is hard.
and it's
Yeah.
hard to make something look visually appealing without being able to use all the Legos. Like,
Exactly. If you just show the first 5 hours, it might all be like the snow area of Diablo
mm-hmm.
4, and that's not just compelling to show just the same snow area for an entire review. So yeah, I feel you. It's a balancing act, man. We try to do our best.
All right.
The other question was about the review process,
yeah,
how
the
it gets
review
assigned at IGN.
process. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a spreadsheet, and people add their name to games if they're interested in reviewing it. And so over time, those games will have like 4 or 5, 6 names next to it of people who are open to reviewing it. And then one of our editors will go through either Dan Stapleton or Tom Marks, and they will see who's free, who actually has time to hit the deadline and isn't working on other projects. And obviously, it has to be a match to that person's interests, which obviously they're adding their names to it, so they wouldn't do that if they weren't interested, and their expertise. And then, yeah, just based on who's free, we distribute codes and try to get as many games covered as we can. But it's pretty much like, you know,
How
like
everything.
I assume like every outlet works.
I think Lords of Gaming.net literally has that same process.
Who's got time?
They
who
do a
wants to do
Trello
it?
board though. They do a Trello board.
Yeah,
All right, so
I don't know why we don't. We have Airtable, but it's kind of not good for spreadsheets. But yeah.
all right, so these are some of the community questions. All right.
Sure.
I strategically put it this way so it would make sense to the conversation. I hate when people like do something later on when it could have been put into the show at that time. Okay. A lot of people want to know Ryan McCaffrey. He did a lot of the information when it comes to Starfield. He does Unlocked. He did a lot of the interviews when it comes to Starfield. People are curious why he didn't do the Starfield review. Now, I don't know. You can't speak for Ryan, but maybe you have more of an insight than we do.
I have guesses. My first guess is that like he probably just didn't have time. Starfield's an incredibly big game, and I don't think he was on any of the Starfield stuff. I think he was playing it privately, but he wasn't like working on the wiki team or
no. I'm talking about interviews and stuff. Like it wasn't.
Oh
like
yeah, the interviews.
The reviewing process. It was
I get
before.
Yeah. So Ryan is the previews lead. So he does all preview stuff, which means games that aren't out yet. And so typically once a game's out, he stops covering it. So that would explain why he was doing Starfield before and not after, right? Like that's his entire job. And so Ryan McCaffrey is one of my bosses at the company, and I work exclusively on preview content for him. Games that aren't out yet, they're not reviews. They're just, hey, we played this game early, and here's some of our early thoughts or impressions in its unfinished state. Yeah, so that's why he's doing it. As to why he didn't review it, my guess is probably he didn't have time. Also, Dan Stapleton was available and wanted to do it, and this is like a game seemingly made for him. He loves Bethesda RPGs. He loves science fiction, etc. Space combat. He reviews all of our space combat starship games. So I think he was probably a better fit anyway.
So someone did ask, because Dan, he's one of the editors, right? What's his official title?
He's the chief editor.
Is it normal for him to review a game?
That's yes, he reviews lots of games.
Okay.
Yeah. He reviews games, but I'll say Dan is a very specific type of gamer. So he tends to review games that are in his wheelhouse, and then anything he doesn't feel like playing. Like I force myself to play games that, I mean, I consider myself an expert on any game I review because I don't review it if I don't feel like I can be an expert on it. But he has a much more narrow because he's a manager at the company, and so he has other stuff he's got to do. But whenever there's like a big one that comes along that he's super interested in, like Midnight Suns, turn-based tactics game, ooh yeah, that's Dan Stapleton because he loves XCOM. That's like one of his favorite games ever. So yeah, he reviews lots of games.
Okay, so
he's good at it.
There was after the review, because Dan gave it a 7 out of 10. There's a lot of backlash, and I noticed. Has IGN ever did a Spaces on Twitter, or was that the first Spaces they ever did? Because I've never seen them pop up. It's just I've never seen a company review a game and then do a Spaces on justifying that review. Do you think that that's like a standard thing that you see? Because like to me,
Yeah.
it kind of felt like to me personally, Dan should have just stood on that. Like no more outline, no more comments. It's like I gave it a 7, deal with that bitch, and just walk away
Yeah.
into the sunset. And I kind of feel like being more outlayish on Twitter, doing the the spaces. Obviously, that someone on here said, "Travis, was you directly contacted by IGN to make a statement on Dan's review?" I put that on here. I knew that that's false,
Yeah.
but it's just
I
because
was
it
not.
kind of
Yeah.
felt like it was a coordinated attack. And I'm sure you don't think that clearly, but I'm sure you can understand why someone on the outside would see that because it was like layers, and then it happened.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Honestly, before the game came out, I thought Dan's review was going to be one of the higher ones. I'll be honest.
Oh,
So we were not anticipating a like damage control. That spaces thing is pretty standard. Like our social team planned it before the
hmm.
review was even out
So
or
these are
before
different
anybody knew its score.
departments, different moving.
Yeah, they're different departments, different teams, and they were basically like, "Hey, this is a big game. There's going to be a lot of people who are interested in it. Let's do spaces." And they do that occasionally, but I think they only do it for big games. I think they did one for Diablo
That would
4.
make sense from like a
But
perspective
it's
thing.
yeah, if it's a big game, just get engagement, get people talking about the game. And it certainly wasn't to justify the review. Let's not forget, 7 out of 10 at IGN means good. Dan liked the game. He gave it a positive score. He just had quibbles with it, and I think maybe more quibbles than some people had. Myself included, by the way. I probably would have given it an 8, but
I
I don't
think
know.
eight's
After
fair. I think eight's
after
fair.
after 250 hours and the last 50 hours the game crashing constantly and falling apart, maybe a 7 is justified, but I don't know. I didn't have to review it, so I haven't had to reflect too much on what my score would be. But yeah, I honestly, a lot of the team at IGN and a lot of the other people I was talking to, like Ebontis and stuff, while we were playing the game, there were not a ton of like optimism around it. Like some people were like, I think this game's going to get 6s on Metacritic. I think it's going to have a 70 Metacritic. Like people were talking like that.
What
And
did you
Dan was,
play it on?
I played it on the Series X and PC. I played a little bit on PC.
I
Mostly
had
on the
more
Series.
issues on PC than I had on the Series X.
That's what I heard. I didn't. So I actually, I didn't have really any problems until 50 hours into the game, and then after 110, 120 hours, it got really bad. Like it got like way worse. So, and that was before the game was out. But we were all kind of like talking about the stuff, the shortcomings of the games, how it doesn't explain the systems well, the
Yeah,
encumbrance problem, the hump you have to climb at the beginning when you have no skills. All of your skill points
you
are
know,
empty. And I think it was a lot of pessimism that first like couple days, and then people started discovering the fun, and the conversation became more positive. And I think Dan got over that hump and eventually liked the game. But at the beginning, I think he was like thinking he was gonna have to give the game a 5 or 6. And I think some people on the team stayed there. Some people are like, yeah, I think Dan's score was too high. So I didn't think that. I'm surprised. I was surprised that the Metacritic was as high as it was. In fact, I bet somebody on the team. I was like, I bet you it's going to be less than 80 Metacritic, just based on all of the people I've talked to. Because everyone I talked to at the time was like, I'm having trouble with this game. But I think that might have just been early
I
impressions
think
before people got
I
through.
think it's a lack of information. They didn't really give you a lot of tools to know how to play the game. It's like we were Bethesda fans thrown into this world, and we had to relearn how to be a Bethesda
Yeah,
fan. On top of like, I had to tell four
it might be
people.
that.
I had to tell
Yeah,
4 people how to dock because they didn't really explain it too well. Like, and
that's
it's
true. That actually was the fact that you have to tap A on ships.
they
That
didn't
took
really
people
explain
a
that
time
too
to figure
much.
out. Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a little bit of that on the team where luckily we had like 30 or 40 people playing, so we were all sharing tips and figuring things out together. But to me, I attribute it mostly to the fact that the first 20 hours of the game to me felt really bad. Like felt like you're just everything was a pain. The encumbrance was so painful. The lack of cargo space on your ship was really, really painful. Now I'm sitting pretty. I've got max encumbrance and my ship has 12,000 cargo
What?
space and all that, so I'm chilling.
Yeah, this isn't really a Starfield thing, so
Yeah,
we'll go ahead and move
that's
on
true.
for
That's true.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But
s-
anyway, yeah. I will say this. I think sometimes when people get on Twitter and they respond to reviews, and I'm including Dan and myself and everyone else, I think sometimes that gives people the impression that they're entering a defensive position about the
mhm.
review or whatever. And I think that's a fair criticism. I don't know that that's the right thing to do. Sometimes I can't help myself. Sometimes I see people online saying that they don't believe me or the things that I said that I believed in, and I'll try to explain it to them because I think they're genuinely asking. And other times it's just people saying, I think you're biased, or I think you're a paid shill, or whatever. And those people aren't really worth engaging with. But sometimes it's hard not to. Sometimes you just want to talk to someone and be like, hey,
Plus,
dude.
not to mention
Yeah,
we're human. You be in a bad
yeah,
mood,
we're
then
here.
bam, you
Yeah,
on Twitter arguing all
yeah.
day.
Also, yeah, I gave it a 7. I liked it. Like I totally get where Dan might have been coming from that, but I don't think that that invalidates the review, right? Like, why would it? It's just that person reiterating the things that they believed and trying to explain it to the people who are asking them. So I think some people look at that and go, oh, it's damage control. It's like, what damage are we controlling? We gave the game a positive review, and that's fine. I get that some people thought it wasn't as positive as it should be, but that's not a controversy. That's just you disagreeing. Reviews are opinions. Dan's opinion is that he thinks the game is good, not great. And I don't think that's a crazy opinion to have. I could totally, even as somebody who
I
likes the
think
game more than him, I can see somebody playing the game and coming to that conclusion.
I think what made
100%.
I think what made it worse is that you know how people are. They draw their own conclusions. I got my own opinions. You got your own opinions. But I think it was
Yeah.
just it was everything together. It was the spaces thing, the tweets thing. You know,
What were the tweets?
I saw him flip out on Tim Dog, which ironically Tim Dog did kind of literally ask him to
Oh,
do.
yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, man, you work at IGN. Like, calm down a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah.
And I get it. It's just people get emotional, especially when you're on. Like, people don't realize when you're like, especially you got all these people who know you, especially being the target of something like that being happen. It's easy to lose your rocker for a couple minutes. And
Yeah.
and I get it. And I think people start bringing up the Kratos outfits and him saying that he didn't
Yeah.
like the Bethesda purchase. So like I could see how people obviously the thing is that you have to disconnect. You know Dan personally.
Yeah.
So it's easier
But even if I was disconnecting, I think that you would have to look at very specific tweets and ignore all the other ones to come to that conclusion, because Dan was Kratos for Halloween because he has a beard and he's bald.
Oh, I hear, but at the
And
same time,
yeah, and God of War was the biggest.
there
game
was
that
another
year,
tweet where he said Xbox can't make any good games. So you start to put two and two together. He's going as Kratos.
I haven't seen that tweet. I would like to see that.
I'll have to bring it up.
I don't know if that's
it's just
real.
I think
I remember I saw that he tweeted that he was not a fan of industry consolidation, which I found that very weird that people were saying that was anti-Xbox. Like, I don't know if
that's an industry issue in general.
Yeah, I don't know if consolidation is good for anyone. I mean, good for Microsoft or whoever's doing the acquiring, but I don't know that it's good for consumers, and I could see why somebody would tweet that. Well, I'm not going to justify everything Dan has tweeted. I'm sure he's tweeted stuff that I disagree with. All I'm saying is,
and I'm sure you've tweeted stuff he disagrees with.
I'm sure, yeah. But all I'm saying is that people can criticize publishers and console makers without having a bias against them, or even if you prefer, like, I can tell you personally, I know Dan's preference. He doesn't care about PlayStation or Xbox. He's a PC gamer, and he sort of just doesn't care about consoles at all. That's his.
I think it's more the
preference.
perception. I
get it.
Especially the outcries on Twitter and stuff like that, and it's just like and you know how trolls are. They smell blood.
Trolls
they
grab
bite.
onto anything, and they misconstrue it. But I think that the adults on Twitter, and I assume that there are a few of those. You seem like one yourself. Is that they, it's one guy's opinion, and you move on. And when somebody tells you that they feel a certain way, unless you have overwhelming evidence, I think you should believe them. And I can tell you personally, I know Dan. I know he believes the things that he wrote. I know that he was looking forward to Starfield more than any other game this year, and he still liked it, but it was less than he expected. Right?
I think people need to realize that too. Like, Dan could have thought this was an 8 out of 10, but the anticipation of playing it for years, the wanting to play it for years, and then playing it, be like, it's not what I expected. Yeah. Like, that can naturally knock you down a level, just that by itself.
Yeah. Even people who really, really like the game, 9 out of 10, realize it has issues.
Oh, it's got a lot of issues, and that's why I felt like I feel like 8's fair. Like
it's fair. 7's fair.
I think the reason
9's fair. They're all fair.
I think the reason that I gravitated more is because I really liked the space combat. Like, I really, really liked it. Probably spent most of the game shooting stuff down, and it seemed like Bethesda spent more time in that aspect of the game than anything else.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it has a lot of experiments that don't work that
So,
I was personally looking forward to, but I mean,
yeah. So
the procedurally generation I think was a huge miss on
yes.
that game. That's my big beef with it.
So someone wants to know, Forza Motorsports is coming out.
Yeah.
Is there really hardcore racers at IGN that the person reviewing it, I don't know if you know it or if you're allowed to say,
Yeah.
are
I
they a
think it's
hardcore
Kristen.
racer?
Yeah, they are.
Okay. I don't know
They
why
are.
they asked
That
that, but
there's the yes answer on that one. Yeah, we have hardcore racing fans. I've not gotten to do a racing review, but I'm also a hardcore racing fan. But I think we have one or two people who are like way more senior than me who
hmm.
really like racing games, and they're always going to get to review those. So I haven't gotten to do it, but yeah,
Oh,
we do.
so this is a little bit with that last question. Is it okay to review a game that you objectively don't like? Like you don't like that gameplay, you can't stand it. Like for instance, like a first-person shooter, like a real Call of Duty head,
Yeah,
reviewing a real-time strategy, like an XCOM or
yeah.
maybe Age of Empire. Do you see that going on in the industry, not just IGN but the industry?
I see it happening in influencers. That's
Yeah,
isn't
I
that
would say we
Donkey's
do that
entire
more than you
thing?
guys. I would
Doesn't
say
Donkey review games with turn-based combat and then comment about how he
I,
hates
I
turn-based
will give you
combat?
that.
That's like,
I'll give you
yeah,
that in
yeah,
terms of review, because I think what it is like that's where being under a brand, because like when we review a game, it's under us. When you
yeah.
guys review a game, it's under IG, and so it's easier for you guys to pick and choose those fights. Like we got to make
Exactly, because
content.
you guys have
There's
to
only
like
one
every
of
game.
us. There's only
Yeah,
one of
exactly.
us, and
Yeah,
there's a bunch of
yeah,
you. So I think that's why
yeah,
influencers have to like really do that stuff more. More.
yeah.
I do see that coming from
To
influencers
answer your
more.
question, I don't think it's my
Standard
thing with
practice.
review. Yeah, it definitely isn't. I was gonna say I don't think that it's the worst thing in the world because my general rule is you should review a game if you think it would be helpful to a certain group of people that you're giving a recommendation to. And if that's useful, fine. If you hate Souls like games and you're reviewing Liza P and it's from the perspective of I'm a guy who hates Souls like games, maybe that's useful to people who don't like Souls like games who are wondering maybe I should give Liza P a try anyway. So I can see that maybe being useful. I can tell you this much. That is not how IGN does things ever, right? Like
They
if
always
you're
try to generally pick someone that would actually represent that community.
if we don't have anybody who feels like they are an expert or likes that genre, we will not review the game. Like literally, we'll just skip it because we're like, hey, look, we couldn't find anybody who jived with this game, so we're just not going to do it.
Dude,
Um, our goal is to be because we're the largest gaming outlet in the world. Our goal is to be as useful to as many readers as possible. So we typically pick an editor who is not only an expert at that genre, but who feels like that game was like made with them in mind, right? And then they can talk about it in an informed way from a perspective of somebody who likes those games. That's always the goal. It's certainly what happened with Starfield. I reviewed Liza P because I'm a huge Souls-like fan, etc. That's how we do it.
because I see, again, this is more towards influencers because I do. It's like I said, like we have to come up with more unique ways of doing content. So, for
Yeah,
instance,
yeah.
when I reviewed Forza Horizon 5, I don't know shit about racing games, and I reviewed it off those merits.
That's
Like
kind
it's
of
like
cool though.
it's like a
Like
casual
if
person coming in from the streets, don't like racing games.
yeah,
How does
yeah.
this game? Because this is supposed to be the king of casual racing.
Yeah. No, I think that's super useful. I think there is an audience for people who are interested in Forza Horizon who know nothing about cars and generally don't like car games. I think that can be useful to a certain person. I'm just saying if you're a large media outlet, that's probably not your strategy because
Hmm.
you're trying to be useful to a large an audience as possible. And probably most of the people reading reviews on Forza Horizon are people who want to know if it's good because they like those types of games. So that would be my opinion on it. But I don't think it's inherently bad to review a game that you normally wouldn't have any interest in because maybe that's useful to someone. I wouldn't do it at IGN.
All right, so I got another question. It's gonna be a weird one. So we see
Okay.
games constantly getting rebranded, like Dead Space. Did they do new things? Yes, but a lot of criticism goes in not just IGN, but the whole thing is like, should these games one be considered for like game of the year? And I know this is off the review thing a little bit. And two,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that especially like definitive editions should they even be rescored? Because like you see a lot of games like years ago got a low score, and then like 2 or 3 years later they'll come out like the definitive Game of the Year edition, and it's just drastically higher. I think one I can name is Ghost of Tsushima. Like the original one was a lot lower, but then they re-released it. I personally don't have a problem with it, but for some reason our community wants your opinion on if that should be done.
I do. For me personally, I think remasters and remakes should never be considered for Game of the Year ever. Because for me, Game of the Year is the game that most represents a step forward for the games industry.
These games had a structure already.
They had an impact. They're like,
and they had their chance years ago. Like, give it to someone else.
Ideally, there is a before GTA 5 and after GTA 5. That is a pure Game of the Year game because it was a masterpiece level that pushed the industry forward in a specific genre. Hades, perfected the roguelite formula. That's a Game of the Year. Like, it just, you feel it, right? And I can't think of a single remake or remaster that's ever made me feel that way. And so, but that is an opinion, right? I'm sure some people are going to play Dead Space and go, personally, that's the best game I played this year, Dead Space remake. I don't think that that's a crazy thing to think. It's just, it doesn't conform with my view of what Game of the Year should be, but there's no rules. It's all subjective. And then definitive edition. So our rule at IGN is we re-review games if there is interest in that thing. Because again, our entire deal is being helpful to readers. And so if there's a whole bunch of people interested in a definitive edition of a game, we will re-review it because they care. If they care, we'll re-review it. Great example of this, we've re-reviewed No Man's Sky 3 times. And the reason for that is not because it got definitive editions, but because
it's changed
a year later and a
too.
year later and a year later, it met our two requirements for re-reviewing a game. One, significant enough changes that it could theoretically change the score.
It's changed the whole game.
And people still care about it. And that second one is actually the harder one because typically when your game comes out, a year later, they're not talking about it. And so there's no point in re-reviewing you because even if your game has changed a lot, it's not helpful to anyone because nobody is asking for a review of your game. They either have already made up their decision or they're close to the community and they're keeping an eye on your forums and your updates and they're already informed, right? And so our goal is to be useful to readers. And I don't know if it's useful to readers to re-review a game that nobody is interested in. So yeah, we do re-review games and I think there is a place to re-review definitive editions, but it's on a case-by-case basis.
So it's my last question. I can talk about Metacritic for a couple minutes.
Okay.
Oh, actually, before that, what do you think about the donkey video? I had that in parentheses just to depend on time.
I actually didn't mind the donkey video.
He had you in it a couple times.
Actually, that's the second video he's had me in. So he had me in a video like a year ago that was sort of similar. It was like when somebody sent me that video, I thought it was going to be him just like laying into IGN reviewers, and it kind of wasn't that. To me, the takeaway was it was funny, but the takeaway to me was that like he was making fun of commenters.
It was more about the commenters.
Commenters tend to think a review.
I think that video was a little clickbaity, like a little clickbaity.
Yeah. Click. I mean, that's his whole thing, right? Like he's kind of shameless and out there and hyperbolic, and that's kind of why people like him. I don't have a problem with Donkey. I mean, I met him. I don't really. Oh, you did? Okay, nice.
And he never comes outside, so
I don't really watch any YouTubers, so it's not how I receive news or am interested in. I don't watch YouTube videos, but I thought that video was funny. I watched it and it kind of made me laugh, and I was like, yeah, writing reviews at IGN kind of sucks because no matter what, somebody's either going to say, oh, you reviewed this game way too highly, IGN doesn't know what they're doing, or oh, you only reviewed this game low because you didn't get it or you weren't qualified or you don't understand the genre. And I'm just like, or I just didn't like it and I disagree with you. You know what I mean? Like, So I thought it was a funny video though.
All right, so let's talk about Metacritic score.
Let's do it.
I feel like Metacritic is the engine and websites is like the gas, like, because it feels like this Metacritic score be getting ridiculous sometimes. Like people might weaponize IGN gave it a 7 out of 10, but they're weaponizing Metacritic to a completely different point. Like, and I get it. I do feel like Metacritic was originated for a different purpose, and then it just completely got on a mind of its own. It's crazy. What's your opinion on Metacritic first off, and second off, is there any flaws that you feel Metacritic should address? Because I personally don't like the 5 out of 5 not converting well. I think Metacritic should be very
Mm.
open with, look, if you're not on a 10 out of 10 scale, because that's what our scale is, you got to convert or you
They're
can't be
actually
on
on a
Metacritic.
100-point scale, so they have a
But it's
yeah.
easier to convert to a 10 out of 10 scale than it is a
Yeah.
5 out of 5. So, give your
Um,
opinion on that.
yeah, yeah. I actually think Metacritic is useful to readers because if let's say that you've got a couple reviewers that you trust or outlets you trust, you can go ahead and look at those individual opinions. But I do think it's useful to have an aggregate of all of the professional critic opinions out there and what the looks like I'm watching you like Venmo somebody for pizza or something. It's kind
Just
of
keep
funny.
talking. I'm
Um,
listening.
yeah. Um, I do think it's useful to have somebody to have that aggregate score. If you're just looking up, hey, what's the general consensus about Starfield? Oh, it's high 80s. Awesome. Sounds like people like it. I think that that's super useful to readers. But I think I have a problem with it being the end all be all. You can't just look at a Metacritic rating and think that you understand everything about the opinions there because you might disagree with the people that are giving it high opinions. You might disagree with people that are giving it low scores. I think the best thing to do is pop in and read a few, or even better, go to a few outlets or creators that you trust, or specific people within those outlets that you trust. Like if you like my reviews, read mine. And if you don't like my reviews, then when you see me reviewing a game, you go, "Oh, well, I just always disagree with that guy, so I'm just not gonna read that review," or I'm at least gonna know that it doesn't affect me anyway. So I think they're useful. I just don't think that they're not something to base your opinion on. Really, they're part of it. They certainly can help inform part of your opinion. Like, oh, 40 on Metacritic. That means a lot of people didn't like it, or at least everybody who reviewed it probably didn't like it, except with a few outliers. I do have problems with their system. They have a really weird like you can only give a score on one platform rule, which IGN somehow gets around, but other outlets don't, which I think is weird. They have a weird like weighting system where certain outlets are worth more weight than others. I don't know if you know about that, but like
Mm-mm.
IGN scores on Metacritic are like worth more than other
Are
outlets.
you
Uh,
serious?
yeah, in terms of the weighting, if you do the math on like it's not a straight average of like all the scores across outlets. It's like a weighted method. So I don't really know how it works. That's just what I've heard.
Is that
Uh,
with just the standard IGN or like all the branches that you guys have? Like, as
I
I know,
couldn't
there's like
tell
an
you.
IGN Japan.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you how it works from international perspective, but I know that all I've confirmed with a buddy of mine is that it's not just a straight average. And he was like, "Yeah, look at this." He like pulled up his phone. He was like, "Look, let's do the math." And he added up all the scores and he averaged it. And I was like, "Oh my God, you're right. That isn't just a straight average." So I've seen it work in real life, but I just don't know. I don't know the specifics of it. But there's some sort of like black box algorithm that they have to do Metacritic. I will say this: I really don't like the way that they consider mixed and negative reviews because I think they have, is it 7 out of 10 is a yellow?
Yeah,
That to me,
and
that is a problem.
I think
Yeah.
it's like I said, like they're the engine, you guys are the gas, because
Yeah.
that's why people see sevens and stuff as bad now. Because now every time you see a seven, that suck a yellow, and people
Yeah.
automatically think, okay, that's mid. We don't want to play that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Metacritic might be responding to a larger problem in the industry, which is that consumers increasingly think that 8 through 10 equals good and 7 through 1 equals terrible, unplayable. I think that there's more room for nuance in a conversation. There are some 7 out of 10s that are really worth playing because, they've got a couple good ideas. And if you like that type of genre and you can overlook some of the faults and deal with some of those caveats, you can find a good game in it. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't just because you gave it a 7 or a 6 doesn't mean it has absolutely no merit. There's a reason you gave it a 7 and not a 5 or a 4, right? And so I just wish people would have a little bit more moderate opinions because there's just a tendency online to say, oh, this is either the best thing ever or it's literal dog shit and
there's
I should
definitely a
not
middle
waste my
ground.
time on it.
There's
And I
definitely a middle
hate that.
ground.
I want people, that's kind of part of the reason I got into this industry, to be honest, because I hate hyperbole. I really do. And I want to bring like moderation to the games industry. I want people to say,
You want to
"Hey,
be
you
that third party unit.
yeah." It's just like I right. I want. It's more like I want like something I really enjoy is every once in a while I have to give a game a really low score, and that sucks. I don't like giving bad game reviews, but what I do like is I like using those games as examples when people say, "Oh yeah, Starfield's a 2 out of 10." And I go, "No, it's not. Here's a 2 out of 10. Look at this game, compare it next to Starfield and tell me that you think that these are the same." Because I have a real problem with that because yeah, it's like example Maddie
Mhm.
Cog's friend, the podcaster, he said Deathloop was the worst game of the year it came
Deathloop
out.
was a good game. I like Deathloop.
Right. Even if you don't like Deathloop,
It's not the worst
if
game of
you
that
think
year.
it's the worst game that year, you did not play many games that year because there were way worse games that year. I think that was the year Nerf Legends came out, literally. Right. So like I cannot I think that there's just a lot of hyperbole of saying if it's not my favorite thing ever, it's the worst thing
Well,
ever. And I
it,
really have a problem with
and
that.
I think that's another difference between standard media outlet and influencers. We kind of get to choose what we want to review. Like there's
Yeah.
no. Sometimes we'll review a game off of like a friend or review something someone told us, but for the most part, we're asking for our review. Like, and we accept the ones that we want. That's not really given to you guys. You guys actually fight for your, seniority to be able to review the stuff that you guys want to review. So when Maddie's saying that's the worst game I played that year, it probably was the worst game in his opinion he played that
I
year.
think he said it was the worst game of the year, not the worst game I played.
Oh no, that's
Yeah.
not it.
Like to me that level of hyperbole has no real place in the discussion. It bothers me. And
Mm-hmm.
I get the instinct to say it because you're online and you're trying to make entertaining content and you want to just like say something that's a little out there, but I just don't think it's super constructive and I have a problem with that. So I don't know, man. That's my whole thing. I get that IGN is boring. I get that. Like they're the adults in the room. I work for them because they're boring. I want to work for the boring outlet because I think that boring is responsible. If your takes are not setting the internet on fire, I think that you're doing things right.
Yeah. So that's pretty much like all. I when it comes to Metacritic, I think that the process should be taken more seriously than it is. I think, and this isn't towards the bigger sites. They have more immune to stuff. Like they could do whatever they want for the most part because they are unaffected. But
Yeah.
I do see a lot of people manipulating the system for personal
User
greed.
scores.
No, just manipulating their scores in general. Like they're going to get traffic, or they want to be that outliner, so they either go really high or most of the time it's really low. We were talking about the individual that gave it a 4. So it's just like I see stuff like that,
I don't think they did that for traffic. I think she wrote that review for
but it's still they
it wasn't
knew doing that would do something.
actually it's a better example of that. There was an outlet that gave Hogwarts Legacy a 1 or 2 out of 10 and they were from an outlet that does not score their games.
You know what's crazy too?
They added a score
Just for
to their
Metacritic score,
process
just for Metacritic.
just so that they could
Do
I don't know if it was just for
oh
Metacritic, but it was just to say like put a stamp on it and be like, yeah, this game sucks. Just to drag it through the mud.
do
And they didn't even score their games as an outlet normally.
it,
That blew my mind. I was like, that's like a new level
and there was
of
someone that reviewed Starfield and gave it like a 5 out of 10 or something, and they even said in their review they played it for 5 hours. It's do you
look, I mean, reviews are based on trust. If you trust the person or the outlet that they're representing, then maybe 5 hours makes sense to you because you also within 5 hours whether you like a game or
do
hate it.
do
But
you
I don't think you're doing yourself any favors if you do that.
that's my last question. We're going to close out of it. Metacritic clearly they got some holes in the ship that they just keep getting the bucket of the water and just see it these in it. They never fix it. Uh, I personally don't blame the individuals that manipulate Metacritic for their personal goal. That's human nature. Depending on morals, almost anyone would do that. Uh, I blame Metacritic for not patching their ship and letting it continue that way.
Right. So yeah, I mean, if I were Metacritic, I would say, hey, we have standards now. But I mean,
We
here's
have
the thing:
standards now.
Metacritic, Metacritic has sort of a they're in a weird position because on one hand they want to be a neutral arbiter, right? They don't want to say specific like, hey, you can't be too negative or you can't be too positive or whatever. They shouldn't be involved in that, and I'm glad they're not. But if I were Metacritic, I would say, hey, we're no longer going to include scores for reviews that address things that are not part of that product, right? If you say, hey, I'm giving this a 2 out of 10 because this company doesn't recycle, and I think that they're destroying the environment, and so I think that I'm going to give their game a bad score regardless of the content of the game. That's the sort of thing that I think is like actually destructive to the review process. And so if I were Metacritic, I would probably enact a policy to say we're not going to accept those scores anymore. If you my developer game buddy said that he read a review of a game that he published that he developed, and somebody said it's too hot in my apartment, 7 out of 10. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh my
you
god.
know what I mean? Like, and that was on Metacritic. And so I think if you're writing a review, it's too hot in my apartment, 7 out of 10. I feel like probably probably shouldn't include that in the Metacritic rating. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's my overall thing when it comes to reviews. I want to do the closing statements. Like, you know, I always take passion over everything, and you're actually the only outlet reviewer I read. I don't see. I don't read. That's why I'm an influencer. I don't write. I don't do none of that. But when I
Just
know
get on the mic.
Travis, when I know Travis is reviewing it, okay, I'll get the glasses
Nice.
and I'll read.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
and what I like about you is like I feel like people either are too hard on games or too soft on games. Uh, but I feel like you're one of the few that I feel's in the middle. You you hit you go for the doubles when you feel it's justified, but I don't feel like you attack something just because it's that. And I respect that. And I had a lot
That's
of
my
people.
goal, man. That's
I
my goal.
I
I
had
just
a
want to be a moderate guy.
I had a lot of
So
people and members was like Travis is the dude to have this conversation with.
nice.
So you got
I
got a,
appreciate
got
that.
a lot of love of the community, but
That's
Travis,
awesome.
closing statement, man. Where can the people find you at?
Yeah. They can find me all my stuff on IGN.com, and they can follow me on Twitter at TieGuyTravis if they want. I also do some YouTube shows. I'm on Ebontis's show, The Last Word, Destiny podcast on Thursdays, and then I do a season gaming show, Bitcast, Sundays at 8 a.m. Pacific. Um, and yeah, I guess my final thoughts are just everybody remember reviews are opinions. People can have opinions. I think some of the times, very rare cases, those opinions are disingenuous, and you can kind of tell who those are, right? Like they're out there to make some statement that has nothing to do with the game. But I think by and large, and I can say very confidently, all the reviews at IGN are genuinely held opinions. And if you don't agree with them, if something seems off to you, read the review and it'll have the explanation there, because I think even a review you don't agree with, you can see how somebody got there if you read the context, and you could say, oh well, A, B, and C thing that they complained about isn't going to hurt, isn't going to, I'm not going to feel that way because that stuff doesn't bother me. Fine, then you disagree with the review, and I think it's okay. There's a lot of room in this subjective space of criticizing art, critically evaluating art, for disagreement. And I think reasonable minds can differ, and there's nothing wrong with that. So try not to get too upset about the vast majority of reviews you read out there, because they're just people's opinions,
Yeah, I agree. And it's like I
including
said,
mine.
I made one post about the damn thing. I just quote
What was your
tweet.
post?
All I said is I don't agree, but as a man's opinion, it is what it is.
Yep.
I did post about the whole Tim Dog thing. That was a different thing, but that wasn't
Tim
had
Dog
nothing to
thing.
do with the
I
review.
don't know what that is, but yeah, I think that's a totally fine opinion. You can even say, "Yo, I think your take is bad."
I
You
mean,
know what I mean?
I
Like,
think Paul Tassi
that's
said
fine.
said a seven's wild. Like,
But yeah, he said a seven's wild. He very much disagrees. He really likes that game, but I disagree with Tassie's opinion too. I read his
mhm.
review and I was like, "Yo, this is way too." positive. Like, did you play the same game as me? Like, this game's got issues, dude.
I
But
feel you.
you know, teach their own. I don't look at Paul's review and go, oh, well, I think he doesn't believe that. I think he's only writing this review because he's an Xbox fanboy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I read Paul's review and I said, well, look, I think he's overlooking some stuff I would have criticized, but I believe he believes this, and
Hmm.
that's all I need. I know where Paul Tassi sits on certain games, and I think a lot of times I probably am going to disagree with where he ends up with his scores. He also disagrees with the review scale. He tends to think that if it's not an 8, it's bad, and he works that into his review scale, which is not the way I operate. And so we actually had a really long back and forth after the Starfield review about why I think a 7 to 10 should mean good, and he disagreed, and we kind of got into it. But it was a good discussion. Paul Tassi's a friend, and I trust that anytime he writes something, it's a genuinely held belief, and I respect that, even if I disagree with it. And that's what I want more people to do.
I consider a 7 fun, an 8 good, a 9 great, and a 10 like amazing. Like I always felt like tens, people expect perfection from tens. I expect the developer did everything that they wanted with that game to the fullest. Not necessarily it's perfect.
Yeah. So 10 at IGN is masterpiece, which
Mm-hmm.
means like we think this game is going to be an example for other developers in that genre going forward. It's going to be like a landmark game. 9 is amazing, 8 is great, 7 is good, 6 is okay, 5 is mediocre, 4 is bad, 3 is awful, 2 is painful, and 1 is unbearable.
And with that, we go
There you go.
in, man. Travis
There you
threw that
go.
scale from the heart.
Boom. Got it
Yeah,
all.
but I appreciate you coming on, Travis. We're going to go and end this. Definitely, if you guys enjoyed this, you can always subscribe to the Patreon and members. I don't know if I'll post this. I'll probably post it eventually to the public. We got some weird stuff going on with the YouTube channel, but I appreciate you for coming through. This is Lord Addict and Travis, Tie Guy, and we're out of here.